Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here to answer the musical question, what have I done to deserve your trust and support and viewership and all of those things? You know, it's very, very funny. In this business, we don't, believe it or not, we don't talk about ourselves enough. I think critics, particularly people who have some musical background and some knowledge, we're afraid to try and say, well, I know more than the other guy knows or something, or I've done this and that. And the truth of the matter is, I'm asking you to trust me, and you should have a reason for it. I should give you the reason for it. I'm not trying to brag or anything. I just want to lay the facts out there. I did do a video on how I became a critic that sort of talks about that, but it doesn't go into it in the same level of detail. And, some of you have read the article that came out recently in The New Yorker, a feature article on me, which is a very, very kind and thoughtful piece by the excellent film critic and now staff writer at The New Yorker, David Denby. And it talks about some of these things, but not as many perhaps as some of you want to know. And also, I see whenever something interesting happens, like I say, Roger Norrington sucks or something, I get all this vitriol about what have you done lately and who the hell are you? And so I want to answer the question. It's a fair question. Who the hell are you? It really is. So I want to just lay it out there. Not in a by way of boasting, just to let you know what the facts are, and to make a couple of points along the way. I think that will hopefully clear some of the fog and give some of you who have to ask your friends, why do you listen to that blowhard? What the hell are you doing wasting your time? At least you can point and say, well, look at that, Maybe it'll be helpful. So, how did all of this get started? My professional life that I'm inviting you to participate in. Well, educationally, I have 2 master's degrees. One from Johns Hopkins University, one from Stanford University. They're both in modern European history with an emphasis on music. My first master's thesis was on Der Fall Hindemith, the Hindemith case, the Hindemith-Furtwängler affair, Hindemith-Furtwängler, where Hindemith and Furtwängler got in trouble with the Nazi government. It's a really good story over his opera Matthias der Maler. It really is. It's a fascinating topic. And the second master's thesis that I earned when I was at Stanford a couple years later was on Orientalism and changing views of imperialist culture in French music, from Delibes' Lakmé to Ravel's Chanson Madagascar, which is also, I thought, a really interesting question, discussing the different view of Western civilization as it imperialistically infiltrated the Orient. And it did change. It changed quite a bit. So those were my 2 master's theses. And after that, I wanted desperately to do things in music. I already had been, because when I was at Johns Hopkins University, I was the director of classical programming at WJHU, which then was the campus radio station. It became part of Maryland Public Radio. It became sort of a major thing. It was rated best in Baltimore for radio when I was supervising classical music programming back in the day. So I was already involved in it then, and I started criticism then too, because I had tickets, critics tickets, complimentary tickets to the Baltimore Symphony and the National Symphony in Washington, and I was reviewing concerts. So it all began around then. And since then, I've done a heck of a lot. Once I got out of college and started working in real estate banking, I might add, because you couldn't make a living as a music critic. I had familiarity with music. I played piano and clarinet, a little bit of viola, and because I was horrible at all of those things, I figured I could do percussion. Because even though I had no training in it, there are all these community orchestras that needed instruments, and I mentioned that I've got my tam and ran around and played stuff, and they wanted my instruments, they got me, and I got to sit at the back of the orchestra. And there's nothing better for 20 years learning how orchestras work, how conductors operate, what goes on, than sitting behind an orchestra waiting for 10 minutes, getting up and going crash, and then sitting down again. It was so much fun. It was absolutely fabulous. So I did all of that stuff, and I continued writing as an independent scholar, doing other things. So as an independent scholar, I've published about a dozen articles in peer-reviewed journals and books, which have been, very well received. That's where I got my information on the vibrato stuff, because unlike the performers who tell us what people were doing in the 19th and 18th and 17th centuries with regard to string performance, I actually did the research. So I know, and I know they didn't, because if they did, then they would be saying much the same things that I'm saying. But they haven't, because I've read their work and they haven't done it. So there you go. There's that. But I also talked about performance reception and some other, a whole bunch of other stuff too. Criticism, the history of criticism, which I think is absolutely fascinating. I have written 16 books on music and edited a couple of others over the years. And I'm doing whatever I can to make sure they're back in print or stay in print. It's a terribly annoying thing. My first book, Beethoven or Bust, was published when I was 25, and the others came out at regular intervals since then. I mean, the books on Mozart, Mahler, Beethoven, Dvorak, Shostakovich, Sibelius, Brahms, Richard Strauss, Handel, Mendelssohn, C.P.E. Bach, really just people who I think are really cool. So I've done that. I'm on the scholarly committee of the Music Criticism Network. I've done, I was a contributing editor. Once I got out of college, I started writing for all the record review magazines. I first began writing for High Fidelity in 1986, but after that, I wrote for Listen magazine. I helped set up Amazon.com's classical pages. I wrote 1 billion of those little capsule reviews that you find there. Schwann Opus, Musical America, CD Review, Classical Pulse. I was a contributor to Stage Bill, Classic CD in the UK, Phonoform in Germany, Scherzo in Spain, Repertoire in France, the Allegro Quarterly, The World and I, the New York Observer, most of these things no longer exist, Phi Magazine, Listen to Norway, Time Out New York. I worked with the BMG Direct Record Club. I was senior editor at Soundscapes in Australia with my good friend Cyrus Mayer-Holmji, who you all know as the brain behind Universal's Australian Eloquence reissue series. I've written program and liner notes for the Malaysia Philharmonic, the Ravinia Festival, the Albany Symphony for RCA Records, Deutsche Grammophon, Universal Eloquence, thanks Cyrus, Hensler Classics, Ondine, Vox, MMG, and Denon. I was, as I mentioned, a radio commentator in Baltimore, but after that, I was a regular guest on WQXR's First Hearing when George Jelinek was running it back in the day. I had a show called Direct to Disc on KDFC in San Francisco when I was at Stanford. I've been on WNYC Soundcheck and NPR's Performance Today. And so that's that stuff. I was the chairman and founder of the Cannes Classical Awards in France, which we did for, 10 years or so in the late 1990s and early 2000s. As a freelance percussionist, I made a couple really nifty recordings, including Earquake with the Helsinki Philharmonic on Ondine Records, the world's loudest classical music album, and the Manhattan Chamber Orchestra. I did a Hovannes disc that I really enjoyed, the Symphony for Metal Instruments on Koch International Classics. So that's sort of some of the stuff that I was doing before 1999 when I founded ClassicsToday.com, which was the internet's first classical music review magazine. And we're still around, and we're still going reasonably strong, and we're doing pretty well. And then the rest is history. As you know, when COVID happened, I founded the YouTube channel, which is now rapidly approaching 5,000 videos. And I have to make a couple comments about that, I think, which is really kind of interesting because, whenever I trash something, I get comments that run along the lines of, what have you done lately? And you've never done anything. And he's a performer or she's a performer. And I go to their concerts and they're wonderful. Well, let me just give you some numbers and the facts. Last year, in 2024, about 10 million people watched my videos. I'm not even talking about ClassicsToday.com, which is millions of other people reading reviews. There are around 20,000 reviews at ClassicsToday.com, and I've written a third of them. So There's that element as well. In addition to the books and articles and all those other things, but about 10 million people. I dare say that is more people than have ever attended a Roger Norrington concert in his entire career. I think that's a pretty safe comment to make. And that's going to be true of most classical performers. It is true that sometimes I will go after somebody for reasons which I think I'm pretty clear about. But by the same time, for every recording I trash, there are 100 that I praise. But think about it for a moment. Those 10 million people and all of the other people I've encountered in the past 40 years, this is 40 years I've been talking about as a music critic, have found something out about the world of classical music. I've promoted the work of those other performers. I'm promoting them. They're making the money based on my recommendations. The record labels are making the money based on my recommendations. I'm not making any money based on my recommendations. I just recommend them. I don't have any fingers in the pot. I mean, there's ad revenue from this channel, which has nothing to do with the record industry. But basically, there isn't anything. I've been pushing and promoting and introducing people to classical music for 40 years now. And I can say with real pride that I have, without doubt, sold more recordings and introduced more people to more music than any of the performers that I have discussed. I know that as a fact. The numbers don't lie. I mean, they just don't. So the next time one is inclined to say, who the hell is he and what has he ever done? I can safely say, I think, that I've done as much or more for the cause of classical music and to introduce people to classical music and to make the case for classical music than 99% of the performers that I talk about. I don't even see that as a question. I really don't. And I'm really, really proud of that. And if it sounds maybe that I'm a little bit defensive about it, well, I am, because it's something that I've worked very hard at and that I actually take very, very seriously. And in addition, as a critic, there is no reputation, except maybe lawyers, who knows, that is in more disrepute than that of criticism. I see all of these, chat rooms and things like, no, critics are worthless. Nobody needs critics. Well, which of you have introduced as many people to classical music as I have? How many of you have worked as hard for any cause other than your own pleasure to broaden the base, to explain music to people, to get them interested, and doing it in a way which, let's face it, writing criticism is a literary art form. Doing this is it's performance art. I mean, you have to it's a performance. We mentioned that, and David Denby mentioned that in the New Yorker article. It's a performance. And it's a performance which, in my case, is wholly improvised. I don't use notes. Some of you have pointed that out to my detriment. I mean, I make a list if I'm talking about a list, but everything that I say is completely off the cuff and off the top of my head. And there are almost 5,000 of these videos now. I regard writing as composition, just as a composer would compose, and this as performance, just as a performer would perform. And I'm not saying I'm better. I'm not saying that I don't want to make comparisons. That's not the point. I'm just talking about what it is and what I've done and why I think that qualifies me to speak to the world at large, and to some of you specifically, as the case may be, about the joys and glory of classical music, bringing the most wide-ranging variety of it to the most people that I can. That has been my goal. It's been my life's ambition. It truly has. Don't ask me why. Maybe I'm crazy, but that has been it. And I think that over the years, I've done everything I could to render myself qualified to do this job, to make this case, to give myself the background, the knowledge, the enthusiasm, the confidence to go out there and present all of this material to you all. So there it is. It's all out there. I've laid my cards on the table. I mean, the list I gave you is not my whole resume, but it's a lot of it. It's enough of it, I think, so that you get a sense of what I've been doing with my life, how I've been spending my time. It's not just that I have 100,000 or more CDs and I've sat around and listened to all of them a bazillion times. I've done that. Yes, I do that. But I've tried to put that knowledge to work, and I've tried to put it to work in a cause that I believe in really, really, really passionately, and that I hope gives you good reason to want to join me in this journey. So that's it, folks. Thank you so much for joining me. If you have, if you haven't, please consider subscribing and coming along for the ride. We're having a very, very good time. And there's no end in sight. There really isn't. So keep on listening. Keep on listening. There we go. And take care. And thank you again for your time and attention and support and encouragement and confidence and validation and all the things you give me. I hope I can give it back to you in similar measure. Take care.